Thanks. Okay, we're.
This is a sneak peek into us rushing to get ready.
Sneak peek.
When we're just like trying to get on air and intro song in it.
All right, our intro song's playing, Darren.
So did we put these on?
Hey, Facebook world, thanks for tuning in. I'm Giuseppe. This is Darren.
You can control your volume on the green.
Okay, so that right there.
Yeah, just in case it's too loud or too quiet.
Just be there. Yeah. Josh is our cameraman. He's our guest too for personal stories,
coming up.
We're putting him to work.
It's about time you got in here.
I know, right? It's about time. Okay, microphones are going on.
Not like you'll need this just yet, but we'll just sort of put it down out of the way for now.
All right. And good afternoon, Vancouver. You're listening to Talk Recovery Radio on 100.5 FM. We're in the downtown east side, Vancouver, Columbia and Hastings Street. We're in our 5th year this year.
Wow.
My co-host, Mr. Darren Gaylor.
Hello, everybody.
Darren. How are you? How are you? Let me hang in there. Thanks, Darren.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Here.
That's the relationship we have.
We're on.
Oh, there we are. There we go. We got some people tuning in on Facebook Live. Hello. Last week's episode had 3,000 views.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and for those of you that follow us on Facebook, you know that all the stories are great, and there's no story that's better. When you're brand new in recovery, your story definitely is the worst, the best, and the most exciting. But in reality, they're all the same. And but Nico was our guest doing his personal story last week, and his brother posted on the comment, apologizing like. I don't really know the history there. I mean, if you read in between the lines, obviously the two brothers must have used together, and his brother was like just making amends on Facebook and just apologizing, and there was this healing. And so I go to Nico. I'm like, Nico, wow, what was that all about? He's like, yeah, I haven't talked to my brother in years.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, I just got the goosebumps.
I know. It's pretty like. We sometimes forget what we're doing here. We're just, microphones, we got clean clothes on.
Yeah.
I showered this morning, and but really, it's like people are healing.
It's true.
It's pretty cool. I was just like, and so hopefully that relationship, gets better.
Well, they say it often when we talk about, especially with our personal story guests. It's sometimes it doesn't come with like this huge. Impact on like, thank you so much for sharing, it just saved my life or whatever, it's just friends are saying, good job, it was great, like, but you never really know like the anonymous person out there that it's affecting, and not to say that his brother's anonymous, but that's awesome.
It's
like,
pretty
that
cool.
Just makes me feel good.
Healing happens when we share, and that's why we do our show every Thursday. We do our show, like I've got a busy day today, I'm in the middle of a busy work week, and I'm really grateful to our two partners, Last Door Recovery Society in Westminster House, New West Recovery powers this radio show, and I get to take 2.5 hours out of my busy day to come on down to a radio show and talk recovery on air. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Talk Recovery Vancouver. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on SoundCloud, we're on iTunes, and we're on the radio, 100.5 FM. So
you can't not get away from us.
No, you can't. I'm everywhere. Yeah, everywhere. And, we'll talk to our personal story later on. Josh, who's in recovery, and we're trying to get into the studio, and it's really sad. We've got one more minute here. Horrible numbers, they've got the new numbers of 1,500 people in 2018 passed away from overdoses, and that doesn't include alcohol, and that doesn't include the people that are still alive but are in care for the rest of their lives. Thousands of people being affected by addiction, and the Liberals came out with their budget a couple of days ago, and I don't even think the word overdose crisis is anywhere in it. Sad. I just couldn't.
Or recovery.
Or recovery. Like, it's just, It
healing,
boggles my
health.
mind. Like I have a baby that
Treatment.
lives in my house, and like the government's spending more energy on measles right now, which is they should,
Don't get started now.
But they should, they should. But like I just can't even believe thousands of families and all these people have passed away, and it's just not the number one thing on their agenda. So if you're a liberal, think about that. Anyway, Darren, who do we got in the show today?
I'm excited. Today on Talk Recovery, we get to talk recovery with June Ariano Jakes. June is the author of Addiction, A Mother's Story. So not just an author, obviously, a mother. I was looking into a lot of the histories of you volunteer within the homelessness areas, dealing with addicted people. Before we get into the story, what is the situation with your son currently?
Well, on February 17th
Of this year?
Of this year,
Okay.
he's 5 years clean,
Wow.
which is pretty remarkable. I am so proud of him.
No
I
doubt.
am so proud of him because he struggled for 23 years with
Yeah, that's a long
really
time.
hardcore addiction, to heroin and to cocaine and then crack cocaine and meth. It was a devastating addiction for him.
Yeah, no doubt. And a devastating journey for his mother. You.
Absolutely.
And-
And his brother and sisters.
Right.
Yeah.
There's, 5 children in total?
Yeah, he's the second oldest. My kids range in age now from 32 to 47.
Okay.
And he's the second oldest.
Now, is there any other child of yours that suffered through addiction?
My 3 daughters, no. My youngest son realized when he was 26 that he was an alcoholic. And on that day, he had hurt someone's feelings. He's a really sensitive guy. I mean, he's 6'5", fully tattooed, like
Yeah.
everywhere. And he is like Mr. Sensitivity, right? And he hurt someone's feelings when he was drinking. And he just said, I have a problem. I've got to stop. And he did. The day after, his brother stopped using, and they didn't know. So they've both had their 5 years. Pretty
Wow.
awesome.
That's an interesting story.
Yeah.
So now, as a mother, as it's in its beginning stages,
Yeah.
I think there is a natural ignorance around identifying addiction. As a parent, maybe that didn't grow up with it, or the quote unquote red flags that I think parents will then feel guilty that they should have seen or should have noticed. But there's going to be behavior that you're going to recognize as not my son's,
Yeah.
not how I raised, not like, you're going to notice some changes. What were some of those changes in the beginning for you?
It's really interesting, Darren, how we have evolved in the last 28 years as far as awareness of addiction and
Right.
it's just phenomenal, right? Back then, you were hard pressed to even hear it talked about, right, on TV or read about it in magazines. And today we're really aware, and we're aware that it's a disease process. And my son was 2 very, very different people. Like my son, not on drugs, during the period of time when he would be healthy, it would be like, take care of yourself, Mom. Don't work so hard. Be careful when you're out there, right? And then my son on drugs would be, fuck you, bitch. I hope you die, right? So there was these 2 very, very different people. And I was really mindful of, this is my son, and this is my son on drugs when his mind is altered. So I decided at that point I would never take personally anything that he said to me when he was using, because that wasn't my son.
So how did you figure out that? Because most people are going to need, a clinical therapist to sort of guide them to that type of understanding or awareness.
I really can't give you an answer there.
Okay.
I just knew that my son was very different, and it would switch on, and when he wasn't using, it would switch off. So to me, this was this is a brain issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the wiring is changed like a computer,
Sure.
right? And, at first it was things disappearing. It's really funny. Like bikes were disappearing, the snowboards were disappearing,
Yeah.
guitar,
Whatever could be carried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know what I did? I actually put a little bit of barbed wire along the fence. And I even said to my son, someone is coming into our yard every night and stealing stuff.
It
And
couldn't
he
be
went,
him.
never thought for a second, right? And it's like, but this time they're going to just like go to jump over the fence and they're going to get a scratch. And so they're going to go, oh, I guess we can't do this anymore. And he was going, good idea, Mom.
Sure.
And it's like, I'm giving him the inside information.
Yeah. So, okay, this is, acknowledging the fact that he's using when you can sort of accept the fact that this isn't my son, this is, there's something going on with his brain, I shouldn't take it personally. But, how do I say it? Like, how did you get to that spot where it was almost like you're past the acceptance of what he's using? Like, when you hear he's using heroin, crack cocaine, did you want to just sort of like protect and deny and hide that?
No, I wanted to get him help. And at one time, I owned my own home. Today I rent an apartment because over the years I mortgaged and remortgaged my home to the tune of $460,000 to get my son into treatment programs. So everywhere that I thought he could get help, I was trying to encourage him to go. He always went reluctantly, of course. He didn't want to get help. He thought he was doing just fine. And but it would usually be when things came crashing down, either there was a pending court date or someone from the dark side was after him for an unpaid debt or something where he would be willing. So I would jump at those opportunities to get him into a place. But and he would be okay while he was in there until he walked out the door.
So, as you sit here now, waste of money?
No.
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 How do you...
I don't regret that. A lot of people ask me that question, and I say to myself, it could have been at that time when he was off the street and he was in a safe environment that maybe saved his life at that time. That's just how I justify it.
Okay. What is your biggest regret or mistake in dealing with your son's addiction?
Well, my son was always so nice, right? Like, it would be, I'm sorry, Mom, you're right. If he had, but that, I know that's all part of manipulation because that worked for me, right? It's like, how do you get mad at someone who is saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, who's showing
you're
remorse,
right, right? And, although it was part of the manipulation process, I also know he meant it. And I know that every single time when he would say, I want to stop, I knew he meant it. I didn't doubt that for a second. And I remember one time, Darren, we were walking and we were up in Wally, and at that time he was living on the street. He was homeless. And we've always had a good relationship in that whether he was living at home or whether he was out, we always stayed in touch. Like 3 or 4 times a week we would talk on the phone or we would get together. And this was one of our kind of walk and talks. And he said, Mom, I used to have hope that things would change. I don't anymore. This is my life. And I remember him saying, I believe I will die on the streets of Surrey. And so I said, well, then I'm just going to have to hope for both of us. And his comment to me was, you can't understand me, Mom, just love me. And I said to him, my love for you is unconditional. It is exactly the same when you are using and when you're having brief periods of being clean. I like you a lot better when you're clean, but I love you exactly the same. And yeah.
That's profound. Because, as a parent now, you sort of hear the unconditional love, but it's hard to really understand that. Because, I find there are conditions.
Yeah.
And I hope to mature and to grow. So that's profound, to sort of like, you're letting the possibility of you being able to do anything, you know, physically, in influencing him to live his life happy, like to just accept your son's going to live without hope, must be devastating for a mother, let alone the drug addiction. Like now you've accepted drugs are a part of his life, but now you have to accept the fact that your son is now a human being in life, living without hope.
Yeah.
Like how sad, that's probably the saddest thing.
It really is. Because I think as parents, and you would get this, as parents, we fix things for our kids,
Exactly.
right? You know, the toy breaks, we fix it. They fall down, we kiss the hurt better. And all of a sudden, this monster is in your life, the monster of addiction. And all the love in the world will not fix that.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part. And you know, when you guys were just talking a few minutes ago about, you know, the number of overdoses and that it's not being talked about the way it should be. You know, when you think of that, if we counted the number of overdose deaths in Canada just last year, that would be the equivalent of 6 or 7 Air Canada or WestJet planes crashing. If 6 or 7 aircraft full of passengers crashed in Canada every year, would we be talking about it? You know, they would be pulling out all the stops.
Yeah.
Because this is unacceptable. You know, this is unacceptable. These are loved people and they are hurting. And one thing that I've really found is that through all the work that I do, there's only 2 reasons really, I believe, that people use, but you guys would know more than me about this, but curiosity and pain. We recognize physical pain, but emotional pain is the one that's invisible, and it's the one that's most profound. Like, we have people being raised with domestic violence or sexual abuse or sexual assaults or feelings of abandonment or neglect or bullying or feeling you're not good enough. Like, there are so many reasons why people have emotional pain, and we're not addressing that.
Right. And that's the thing, the physical pain, I can see where the injury occurred. I can go to the doctor, I can get that fixed, and I can accept the fact that I'm going to have to wait a while to let that heal.
Absolutely.
And then it's going to be fixed. Emotional pain, you can't just go to the hospital, put a Band-Aid on it.
Exactly.
Right, and that's do you believe, like, as a mother that's obviously made phone calls, like, did he go to those places that do provide that treatment that for that emotional pain?
Not to the extent that it needs to be.
So what's missing out there?
I think regardless of what we say, there is still too much of a stigma and too much shame, blame put on people that are struggling with addiction. You know, we've come a long way, and I think the reason why we've made progress is because all of a sudden, people that were not addicts started dying. Occasional users started dying, and the tragedy of that for those families was like, they just used occasionally. It made people realize this can happen to anybody, because we talk about overdoses. What I think we should be talking about is a poisoned drug supply. Like, our drug supply on the streets are poisoned with fentanyl, carfentanil.
And the fact that, I mean, if I'm sure you've noticed, you know, with your son's addiction, like, it's the more and more and more, and what can get me higher quicker.
Yeah.
And you know, if you can give me a safer heroin,
Absolutely.
but this over here is going to get me how I really need to feel, and my tolerance is through the roof. So I'm not going to give this up, right? Because addiction really doesn't see that. It doesn't want to be safe. It's going to take risks, and it's going to try to numb out with the strongest and boldest.
Yeah.
And how many close calls did your son have?
He had probably close to a dozen overdoses on the streets of Surrey, and and Vancouver. Surrey was his primary area.
And what do you do? How do you cope with that? Do you go save him? Do you go hospital? Do you
Yep.
bring him home afterwards? Do you just sit at home and just say, hey, that's his life. I hope he gets better.
No, I never did that. I was more the jump in and let's see what we can do. Let's get you into another place. You know, clearly you need this. I guess I hit bottom long before he did.
Yeah.
In that he wasn't ready, and I would have done anything in the world to get him the help he needed, right? But I learned a lot. I learned that I don't give up on people. I've learned that I'm stronger than I would have ever thought I was. And I realized how strong my son is, that he could survive what he did and come out of this all these years later. Like, I think of the number of times, you know, that he was beaten with baseball bats and metal pipes, the number of times he was stabbed and shot at. He was doused with gasoline by a guy trying to set him on fire. You know, he had been held against his will.
See,
One time.
you would think he would go crazy.
Yeah.
How did you
Right.
cope through all of this?
Do you know what? I remember one time when he was missing, and I walked the streets and back alleys and checked the overgrown empty lots, dumpsters, everything, and I carried a picture, and I walked the streets all night long showing people, have you seen my son? You know, and because I thought he had kind of given up hope, but I couldn't, if he was going to be okay, if he was going to survive this this ordeal, then somebody had to be reminding him of his value, of his worth, because he is a wonderful man.
So that wasn't your insane, codependent enabling. That was your responsibility as a mother.
Oh yeah.
See,
But I did crazy stuff too.
well, see, that's the thing. Like, we've interviewed so many perspectives and
Yeah.
opinions and professional, opinions on a parent's position dealing with an addict. And someone we interviewed would have said, that's crazy. That's way too far. That's putting yourself in danger. Then there's somebody else that would have said, but that's what needed to be done for you to, for someone to lay their head on their pillow that night, to feel that they did all they could. So there is no real sort of, this is how you deal with your child's addiction for any group of people, really. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that your personality is showing something. Your sense of optimism is another side of it. How, like you said, how strong you started to believe you could be is adding to your own personal needs as to how to provide guidance and how to take this on. And it's going to be different than another mother.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be different than another mother. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think, the best message we can say out here is, I mean, first, I guess there's some self-discovery, isn't there?
Absolutely. And there's no easy
What you're
answer, right?
capable of doing
Yeah.
without going completely, out of your mind.
Yeah.
So that's amazing that was your response to how did you cope? Getting yourself out there, like, right in the mess of it all.
Yeah. But like when you mentioned, like sometimes you kind of go overboard.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Like at one time, I put my house, when my son was incarcerated, and I had turned him in when I realized he had robbed a bank. And so I turned him in to, number one, have him be responsible for what he did, get him off the street, and also prevent him from maybe hurting somebody, right? And when he was incarcerated, he really came into his own. He became healthy, and his mind was clear, And I thought, okay, I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to go and buy a ranch up in the Chicolton, right?
Free range your son. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's no drugs there. There's nothing. He'll be safe there. He'll be happy there.
Put the barbed wire to keep him in.
Yeah, right? It's like, that's how as parents we become insane, right?
Yeah,
And it's like,
makes sense.
he never in a million years ever said to me, I want to live in the wilderness, you know? But I'm thinking, oh,
You know
I
what
can
he
say,
needs.
I know what he needs.
He
right?
doesn't know what he needs yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So totally, like, yeah. And in my book, I talk about, I mean, it is like the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's laid bare. There's not, I mean, it's just real, right? It is, there's no Hollywood version. It's not like all cleaned up and it's just, it's just real.
And I know it's why you wrote the book. It's what parents need to hear.
Yeah.
You know, like constantly they're seeking professional help, and often the downfall of the professional help is it's one-sided.
Yeah.
You know, it's interventions don't work; they cause harm. But this might, if some time was spent in learning the family, they might find out that no, this particular case would benefit from an intervention because there's countless results of great outcomes starting from an interventions, but there's also families that have got sort of destroyed from within.
Right.
So what I want to ask you is, okay, it's great your son's found some success and he's found some recovery. Did you find freedom before that? Did you find peace while he was still out there? Like, is there that potential, or does the child have to either, find recovery and succeed in their life for the parent to sort of be able to take a breath?
I don't know that I can even really give you an answer on that, Darren. It's I think we come to a point of acceptance of what is, but with the hope of what can be. And I never ever went to bed at night without saying, God, please keep an angel on his shoulder until he can find his power. And I know someone's power, I guess, people are not their addiction. Their lives are affected by their addiction, but they're not their addiction. And whatever works for one person may not work for another. Abstinence works for many people in a 12-step program, but for other people, medically assisted treatment with Suboxone or methadose or methadone. And we have to also look at those people that have tried all those, have gone to the treatment programs, and still their lives are shattered. If they need to have intervention in clinics where they can go in and get their prescription heroin or their prescription morphine, everyone's thing might be different. What works for one isn't going to work for another. But we can't just let people die.
Right.
So whatever help, whatever harm reduction we can provide so that someone can lead their best life. And your best life may be different than my best life. But whatever someone's best life is, they deserve to be able to live it. And
And what can we say to a mother that's in it right now, that's struggling with, am I going too far? Am I spending too much money? Should I kick him out? Do I allow him to stay? Like, that just doesn't, that's going crazy from not knowing what to do. What can we tell her?
I don't think there is an easy answer. What works for me might not work for you because we're all different. I just know, for me, when my son was making effort, he lived at home. When he was stealing from us and overdosing in the bathroom, it was time to go. Either I'll do everything I can to help you get well, but I won't ever do anything again to keep you ill. And I think sometimes as parents, we think, okay, well, I'll just help a bit with the rent so that they have a roof over their head, or I'll just fill the fridge with groceries. All we're doing is lessening the impact, right? But that, again, that's just my opinion. And as parents, we have to do what we can live with. What you can live with might not be what I can live with. So we have to be true to ourselves in that way too. There isn't an easy answer.
So well said. And I think that so many times, people writing books and saying, I have the answer. And I think you just nailed it. Like, whatever you can live with, that's huge. But find some support and get involved with other parents that that can understand. I mean, I'm 13 years clean. My sister's 7 years clean. And my mom is still involved in the parent groups at the treatment centers that we went to. Because she knows that it's important for other parents to hear, the struggle and the success and the hope and the lack of, and that everything you're doing isn't wrong.
Exactly. Good for your mom.
Yeah.
That's important, right? Because that gives hope. When you're in a situation where you feel like, is there any hope? And then you have someone come in and say, yeah, I've been there. And my son is doing well. He's on the radio today.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's those things are huge, right? Because when your kids are so deeply embedded in it, or your loved ones are so deeply in their addiction, it's pretty easy to see no hope in the picture, right? And there is hope. But we have to embrace what's out there and embrace what's available and just make sure that we give people the opportunities to get well.
Beautifully said. June Iriano-Jakes. The book is Addiction, A Mother's Story. There is hope. There is hope. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us today.
Darren, thank you. And is it okay if I just give my website? Because there's lots of information on there. www.addictionamotherstory.com. And I try to keep it updated with information for parents and other loved ones.
And you can get the book there and find out more about you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for tuning in and checking us out also on Facebook. Coming up, we'll have Josh share his personal story. And first, we're going to go with a little Neil Young. This is Helpless.
Is there a washroom quickly?
Yeah.